The day Harlan Voss laughed in Ray Duchamp's face was the day Ray decided he was done being invisible. It wasn't a quiet laugh. It wasn't the kind a man keeps to himself. Harlan Voss stood in the parking lot of his own commercial property on Drummond Street in Sudbury, surrounded by two of his associates and his property manager, and he laughed loud enough that a woman walking her dog across the street looked over. He laughed like a man who had never once been wrong about anything and wasn't about to start now. Ray stood there holding a folded check, $11,000, every cent he had. The property in question was a former auto body shop, a squat cinder-block building wedged between a closed-down print shop and a chain-link fence covered in dead vines. The roof had a patch on the east corner that someone had repaired with mismatched shingles sometime around 2009 and never touched again. The roll-up bay door on the left didn't fully close. The floor inside was stained with decades of grease and antifreeze and oil, layered like geological strata. 3 fluorescent tubes out of 8 still worked. The place smelled like rubber and cold concrete and something faintly metallic that Ray couldn't quite name. Ray had been inside twice. Both times he'd walked the floor slowly and said very little. Harlan Voss, who owned 14 commercial properties across northern Ontario and was the kind of man who wore a wool blazer to a site visit, had acquired this particular building as part of an estate purchase 3 years earlier. He'd been trying to move it ever since. 2 potential buyers had fallen through. A developer had looked at it and walked. The building sat on a lot that was too narrow for a drive-through and too contaminated for a fast food chain to touch without an environmental study. So when Ray Duchamp, a 51-year-old with a jacket that had seen better days and a pickup truck with rust creeping up the wheel wells, called to make an offer, Harlan's assistant had almost turned him away at the phone. But Harlan had taken the meeting. He took all meetings, even the ones he expected nothing from. It was a habit he'd built his reputation on. What he had not expected was the number. 11,000, Ray said again, in case there had been a misunderstanding. There hadn't been. Son, Harlan said, and Ray was not his son and was only 11 years younger than the man, but let it go. I've got parking lots in Timmins worth more than that, you might, Ray said. But you've been holding this one for 3 years. Harlan's property manager, a thin man named Gord who worked for Harlan for 12 years and had learned to read his moods the way a sailor reads weather, took a small, quiet step back. The environmental liability alone. Harlan began. I'm aware of the Phase 1, Ray said. I read it. The contamination is historic and shallow. It's manageable. Harlan looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at his associates. Then he laughed. It wasn't cruel, exactly. It was the laugh of a man who has seen too many small offers from too many undercapitalized dreamers and knows exactly how every one of those stories ends. It was dismissal dressed up as amusement. It said, you don't know what you don't know, and you never will. $11,000, Harlan repeated, shaking his head. He took the check from Ray's hand, looked at it once, and held it back out. I'll tell you what, you seem like a guy who works. Keep your money. Go buy yourself a nice used car. Ray took the check back. He folded it along the same crease and put it in his jacket pocket. When you're ready to talk seriously, he said, you have my number. He got in his truck and drove home. Ray Duchamp had spent 23 years as a mechanic. Not a shop owner, not a manager. A mechanic, the kind who comes in at 7 in the morning, pulls on coveralls and doesn't look up from an engine until 4 in the afternoon. He'd worked at a dealership in Sudbury for most of that time, the kind of steady unionized job that didn't make anyone rich but paid the bills and offered a pension that still existed, which in this era was not nothing. Then the dealership had been bought by a regional chain, and the chain had done what chains do. Brought in their own people, restructured the service department, and let go of 11 mechanics in a single afternoon. Ray had been one of them. He was given a box for his personal items and a handshake from a man he'd never met before that day. He was 50 years old when that happened. His daughter Amber was 23 and working as a dental hygienist in Barrie. His marriage had ended 6 years prior, quietly and without much drama, just 2 people who had drifted into separate silences and eventually acknowledged it. He lived in a rented house on a street where the neighbors changed every year or two and he knew almost none of them. He had $11,000 in savings. He had a set of tools that half-filled a trailer, and he had a specific kind of knowledge that 23 years of working on engines gives you. Not just technical knowledge, though that too, but a feel for what a machine needs, a patience with broken things, a refusal to be defeated by complexity. He had also, for reasons he never entirely explained to anyone including himself, spent the last 4 years buying and selling old cars on the side. Nothing fancy. A '94 Camaro he'd found in a field near Espanola, a late '70s Dodge pickup that took 3 months to sort out, a '68 Chevelle he'd sourced from an estate sale, spent 8 months on, and sold for 4 times what he'd paid. He worked on them in the driveway of his rental, in the cold, with a space heater and a work light and whatever time the evenings and weekends gave him. He was good at it. More than good. He was the kind of good that other people in the hobby noticed and mentioned to each other. But a driveway is not a business, and Ray had been thinking, for the better part of 2 years, about what a real space might make possible. He'd looked at properties all over the area, too expensive, too small, wrong zoning, too far from the customer base he imagined. The Drummond Street building had showed up on a commercial listing that a friend had forwarded to him almost as a joke. The price was listed at $67,500, too high, but the building had sat for 3 years, which meant the price wasn't real anymore. The price was a number Harlan Voss had put on a page and hadn't updated because updating it meant admitting something. Ray had done his research. He'd read the Phase 1 environmental report, which was available through the listing. He'd talked to a contractor friend about what the roof would cost. He'd looked at comparable sales. He'd calculated what he could put into the building over the first 12 months if he was also generating revenue from it. $11,000 was not a random number. It was the number Ray had landed on after 6 months of thinking. He drove home from that parking lot, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and looked at the crease in the check for a long time. Then he called the listing agent directly. The listing agent's name was Bev Marchand, and she had been trying to move that building for Harlan Voss for longer than she cared to admit. She was professional and pleasant on the phone, but Ray could hear, underneath it, the particular tiredness of someone who has watched a deal fall through too many times. "He won't take 11, she said. "I know," Ray said. "What would he take?" There was a pause. "Honestly? He's had conversations at 35 that didn't go anywhere. I think he'd entertain something in the mid-20s if the buyer was solid." Ray was quiet for a moment. "I have 11 in cash, I have clean credit, and I can get a small business loan for the rest if the number is right." "What's the actual floor here, Bev?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Let me make a call," she said. It took 3 weeks. Ray came back twice more with revised numbers, supporting documents, a 1-page business plan he'd written himself at the kitchen table, and a letter from his bank. Harlan Voss never met with him again in person. The negotiation happened entirely through Bev Marchand, who turned out to be a more effective advocate than Ray had expected, possibly because she wanted this building off her books as much as anyone. The final number was $19,000. Harlan's face when he signed the papers was not on record. Gord, the property manager, countersigned as witness and said nothing. Ray shook hands with Bev afterward in the parking lot of the lawyer's office, and she said quietly, "I hope you know what you're doing." "I think so," Ray said. He didn't say it with confidence. He said it the way a man says something true that he knows might not be enough. He got in his truck, drove to Drummond Street, and parked in front of the building. He sat there for about 10 minutes without getting out. The March sky above Sudbury was the color of old nickel. The building looked exactly like it always had, blunt and unpromising, a structure that had survived not through elegance but through the sheer refusal of cinder-block to cooperate with gravity. Ray got out, unlocked the side door, and went inside. The first thing he did was clean it, not renovate, not rebuild, clean. He rented an industrial pressure washer and spent 4 full days on the floor alone, working in sections, letting each section dry before moving to the next. He replaced the 3 dead fluorescent tubes with LED shop lights, all 8 bays, spending money he'd budgeted carefully and tracked in a notebook he kept on the workbench. He fixed the roll-up door himself, a bent track bracket, 2 hours of work, $7 in hardware. He patched a section of drywall in the small office at the back where water had gotten in through a window seal that had failed. By the end of the second week, the building looked like a different place. Not beautiful, not impressive, but functional and clean and lit properly, which turned out to make a significant difference in how a space feels. He moved his tools in on a Saturday with help from 2 friends and his neighbor across the street, a retired electrician named Walt. No, not Walt from the list, a different man entirely, who showed up without being asked because he'd seen Ray loading things from the trailer and figured he could be useful. Ray bought all 4 of them lunch from the sub shop 2 blocks over, and they sat on overturned crates and ate without much talking, which was the comfortable way. He had no customers yet. He hadn't advertised. He didn't have a sign. What he had on that first Saturday was a clean shop with good lighting and a floor you could walk across without your boots sticking. It was enough to start. The first customer found him through a post Ray put on a local Facebook group. Not an advertisement exactly, but a response to someone asking for a recommendation for an honest mechanic. Ray had replied with his name and address and a line that said he was just setting up and taking on a few jobs to start. That first customer was a man named Franco Elate who needed a clutch replaced on a 2007 Civic. Ray did it for a fair price, found a worn motor mount while he was in there, showed Frank in person before touching it, and replaced it for cost on the parts. Frank left a 5-star review on Google within an hour of picking up the car. He mentioned the motor mount specifically. The second customer came through that review. The third came through the second. Ray was not trying to grow fast. He was trying to do good work and let the work be the advertisement, which is a slow strategy and a reliable one. By June, 3 months after he'd taken possession of the building, he had more work than he could handle alone. He was turning down jobs or scheduling them 3 weeks out, which is the kind of problem most new businesses would celebrate and Ray mostly just found stressful. He hired one person, a young guy named Trey Fontaine, 26 years old, who'd come in looking for work with a technical school certificate and grease already under his fingernails from a summer job. Ray worked alongside him for 2 weeks before giving him any solo responsibilities, which Trey apparently found both demanding and reasonable, and mentioned to his girlfriend, who mentioned it to her mother, who told 3 of her friends that the new shop on Drummond Street was run by someone who actually knew what he was doing. In small cities, that is how reputations are built. The cars came later. That part Ray hadn't entirely planned. It started with a phone call in late April from a man named Doug Arkand, not on any list, a plumber from Chelmsford who had inherited a 1971 Ford Mustang Mach 1 from his uncle and had no idea what to do with it. The car had been sitting in a garage for 9 years. It ran, technically. Doug had started it twice to check, but it needed everything and Doug was not a car person and the storage unit his uncle had used was being sold as part of the estate. "I don't really want to sell it," Doug said on the phone, "but I also can't keep paying storage on it and I don't have anywhere to put it. My wife says either it goes or the golf clubs go, and she's not kidding." Ray drove out to Chelmsford on a Tuesday evening and looked at the car for 40 minutes without saying much. It was all original except for a set of incorrect wheels someone had put on it in the 90s. The body was solid. The interior was rough but complete. The engine had a slow oil leak from the valve cover gaskets that had left a map of itself across the block, dark and detailed. He told Doug what he thought it was worth in current condition and what it might be worth restored. He told Doug honestly that restoration would take time and money, and that the gap between current value and restored value was not always as large as people hoped, depending on the spec. Doug listened to all of this and then said, "Would you want to buy it? Like, just take it off my hands for something reasonable." Ray thought about it for a moment that was shorter than it should have been. "Probably. Yeah," he said. "I think I would." They settled on a number that was fair to Doug and workable for Ray. Ray trailered the Mach 1 to Drummond Street on a Friday night and parked it in the back corner of the shop under a canvas tarp. He told himself he'd get to it when he had time, which he knew was not a real plan but felt like one. The second car came 6 weeks later. A 1969 Chevelle SS from an estate sale in Lively, still wearing factory paint in a shade of green that had been discontinued before Ray was born. The third was a 72 GMC pickup in near-complete original condition, found through a tip from a customer who had a neighbor who had a father who had stopped driving. Each car had a story that ended with someone who needed it gone and wasn't sure what it was worth, and trusted Ray enough, because of how he'd treated them on the phone, to let him make an offer. By the end of summer, he had 4 classic vehicles in the back of the shop. They occupied space he didn't technically have, which meant Trey had to shuffle the layout a bit, and they had a brief and practical conversation about whether Ray was running a repair shop or a collection. Ray didn't have a clean answer to that. Both, he thought. Maybe that was the answer. Both at the same time, and see what happened. He started on the Mach 1 in August in whatever hours existed outside the regular work. Some evenings, Saturday mornings before Trey came in. He worked slowly and methodically, the way he always had, documenting everything, sourcing correct parts where he could and rebuilding what he couldn't source. He was not trying to make the car perfect. He was trying to make it honest. That was a distinction he'd arrived at over years and couldn't entirely explain but felt strongly about. There was a version of classic car restoration that was about impressing people, making something that looked better than it ever had, concours level, show-ready, the kind of result that wins awards at events where men in khakis stand around agreeing about it. And there was a version that was about returning something to what it actually was, its real character, its weight and smell, and the particular way the door closes, the way the engine sounds when it's warm and settled and doing what it was built to do. Ray was interested in the second kind. The Mach 1 took him 4 months. He drove it for 2 weeks after it was finished, just to be sure, and then listed it through a specialty broker he'd connected with at a show in Barrie. It sold in 11 days. The number was substantially more than Ray had paid for the car plus his hours, more than he'd honestly expected when he started. He stood in the shop after the transport truck pulled away and looked at the empty corner where the car had been. Trey was out at lunch. It was quiet, the LED lights hummed very faintly above him. He thought about Harlan Voss laughing in the parking lot on a cold March morning, holding that check out to him with 2 fingers. He thought, okay. Then he went back to work. Amber came up from Barrie in October and Ray showed her the shop. She'd heard about it, of course. They talked every week or two, but she hadn't seen it in person since he'd taken possession. She walked through slowly, looking at everything. Trey was there and they shook hands, and Trey told her the shop was a good place to work, which he said simply and without performance, the way young people sometimes say true things without knowing how much they land. The Chevelle was up on the lift. Amber stood underneath it and looked up at the frame which Ray had cleaned and painted. "You did this yourself," she said. "Most of it," Ray said. Trey helped with the body prep. She looked at it for another moment. She had her mother's way of being quiet when she was actually taking something in. "Dad," she said, "this is actually kind of incredible." Ray almost said it was nothing. He caught himself. "Yeah," he said instead, "I think it might be." They went for dinner afterward at a place nearby that did good burgers and had a decent local beer on tap. Amber asked him about the business side, not with worry but with the genuine curiosity of someone who wants to understand something. He told her about the repair work, the volume he was handling, what he was paying Trey, what the overhead was, what the margins looked like on the restorations versus the regular work. "You need a bookkeeper," she said. "I know," he said. "Dad, I know, Amber. I'm working on it." She pointed at him with a French fry. "This month." He hired a bookkeeper the following week, a woman named Sylvie. Sylvie was on the list. He hired a woman named Carol Beaulieu, who came recommended by the Small Business Development Center and who, upon reviewing Ray's notebook and his shoebox of receipts, said without any particular judgment, "Okay, we're going to fix this." Carol organized everything retroactively to opening day. When she presented Ray with the first real financial summary he'd seen of the business, he looked at it for a long time. The numbers were better than he'd known. Not dramatically better, but meaningfully so, the kind of better that over time compounded into something. "You're profitable," Carol said. "You have been since month 4. Ray folded the summary carefully and put it in his jacket pocket, in the same pocket where he'd kept the $11,000 check. In November, he got a call from Bev Marchand. "I just wanted to say hello," she said, which they both knew was not entirely the reason. "And I may have told a couple of people about your shop. I hope that's okay." "Of course," Ray said. "Thank you." "How's it going?" she asked, and she meant it. "Really well," he said. "Better than I expected. I'm glad," she said, and then after, "Harlan drove by last month sometime. Gord mentioned it to me. He just drove by and looked." Ray didn't say anything for a moment. "Okay," he said. "He didn't say anything about it," Bev said. "Gord just thought it was, I don't know. He said it was interesting." After they hung up, Ray sat with that for a bit. He didn't feel triumphant about it exactly. He didn't feel like he'd beaten anyone. The building had always been what it was, a solid structure in a decent location with good bones and a manageable problem. Offered at a price that was too high until it wasn't anymore. Harlan had looked at it and seen a liability. Ray had looked at it and seen work that needed doing. That was all. That was the whole thing. He went back to the Chevelle. The city noticed the shop the way cities notice things that do what they say they're going to do, not in a dramatic way, not with ceremony. A brief mention in a local business newsletter in December, a post on a Sudbury Classic Car forum where someone described having their '66 Galaxie worked on and said it was the best shop experience they'd had in 20 years. A call from a journalist at the local paper who wanted to do a small feature on the shop for a New Year business stories piece. Ray agreed to the interview, though he wasn't comfortable with it. He sat across from the journalist at the shop, a young woman with a notebook who asked good questions and tried to answer honestly. When she asked him what made the shop different, he thought about it for a long moment. "I take the cars seriously," he said. "Not as investments, as machines that somebody made and somebody else has been taking care of for 50 years. They deserve to be treated accordingly." She asked him about the building, about buying it from Harlan Voss. Ray looked around the shop, at the LED lights, the clean floor, the Chevelle on the lift, the GMC in the corner waiting its turn, Trey at the workbench doing a brake job on a Tacoma. He thought it was junk, Ray said. "I thought it needed work." He paused. "Turns out we were both right. It just depended on what you were planning to do with it." The article ran on the 3rd of January. It was 4 paragraphs. It included a photo of Ray standing in front of the building, not smiling, just looking at the camera with the particular steadiness of someone who has decided to stop being invisible. The day it ran, his phone received 14 messages before noon. Harlan Voss read the article the same morning. He read it at his desk in the office above his main property management operation with coffee that had gone slightly cold. He read it twice. Then he set it down and looked out the window for a while. He was not by nature a man who revisited decisions. His philosophy had always been, make the call, move forward, don't carry it. It had served him reasonably well for 3 decades. But he thought about that parking lot. He thought about handing back the check. He thought about the laugh, not just the laugh but the 2 beats after it, where he'd watched Ray's face and seen something there he'd chosen not to look at too closely. He picked up his phone and called Gord. "The guy in the paper this morning," he said. "The mechanic on Drummond, yeah," Gord said. "That's the building we sold in March?" "Yep." Harlan was quiet for a moment. 19,000, he said. Not a question, just the number out loud. 19,000, Gord confirmed. Another silence. "All right," Harlan said and hung up. He didn't call Ray. He didn't reach out through Bev. He didn't drive by the shop again as far as anyone knew. He went back to his 14 properties and his wool blazer and the operating logic that had built his career, which was, you can't win every call, and the ones you don't win teach you something if you let them. Whether Harlan Voss let this one teach him anything, nobody outside that office knew for certain. His assistant thought she saw him slow his car once, in February, while driving past Drummond Street, before continuing on without stopping. But she wasn't completely sure, and she didn't mention it to anyone. By February, Ray had hired a second mechanic, a woman named Denise Rouleau who'd been working at a dealership in the valley and wanted something different, and had found the job listing through the same local forum where people had been talking about the shop. She came in for a half-day trial and got offered the position before she left. He was also by then in conversations with the owner of the space next door, the former print shop empty for 2 years, about a lease that would let him expand the restoration side into a dedicated bay separate from the regular server work. The numbers were early and the paperwork was months away, but the conversation was real. He told Amber about it on the phone one evening in February, standing in the shop after closing, the overhead lights still on, the Chevelle finished now and waiting in the corner like a patient animal. "How are you feeling about it?" she asked. He thought about that. Looked around the shop. Thought about where he'd been 2 years ago, sitting at a kitchen table with a folded check and a problem he hadn't solved yet. "Like I know where I'm going," he said. "For the first time in a while, maybe." "Good," Amber said. "That's good, Dad." After they hung up, he turned off the lights in sections the way he always did. Bays first, then the workbench lights, then the office, the way you close a place that belongs to you. He locked the side door and stood outside for a moment in the February cold. The building looked the same from the outside as it always had. Cinder-block, patched roof, the name he'd painted in simple white letters above the door, Drummond Auto Works, visible in the light from the street lamp. Not impressive, not dramatic, just a building on a street in Sudbury doing what it was built for. Ray buttoned his jacket and walked to his truck. He had a full schedule tomorrow and he intended to be there early.